I always believed my family's biggest problem was the way we avoided talking about anything real. We were the kind of family that swept problems under thick rugs, the kind that posed for pictures with tight smiles while entire emotional earthquakes cracked the ground beneath us. But if you had told me the truth I would uncover at 32 years old, I would have laughed. I would have said my family was dysfunctional, sure, but not dramatic enough for the kind of chaos other people whispered about on daytime talk shows. I would have been wrong. The story really began on a muggy Thursday morning in July, the kind where the Atlanta heat clung to your skin like an accusation. I had been running late for work, scraping my hair into a bun with one hand while trying to gulp down the last of my lukewarm coffee with the other. My phone buzzed twice, once with a message from my boyfriend, Jordan, telling me he had a late meeting and wouldn't be home until after 10, and once with a voicemail notification from my mother. The first message didn't feel strange. Jordan always had late meetings. The second one absolutely did. My mother was not a voicemail person. She was a call 5 times until you answer person. A show up at your door with Tupperware and guilt person. Not a leave a quiet message at 6:17 a.m. person. Something about the timestamp made my stomach tighten. I played the voicemail while rushing down the apartment stairs, my heels clacking against the concrete. She told me she needed to see me. She said she wanted me to come home this weekend. She said there was something important she had to tell me before it got worse. Before what got worse? She didn't explain. She just repeated my name in a tone that cracked somewhere between fear and apology. I stopped on the landing and gripped the handrail as the recording ended. Sweat beaded under my arms, not from the heat but from the sharp, sudden instinct that whatever she was about to tell me had nothing to do with her health, her job, or her endless arguments with my aunt. This felt heavier. Darker. Familiar in a way I didn't understand yet. I didn't call her back. Not right away. I needed time to process the knot forming in my stomach. That evening, when I finally gathered enough courage to dial her number, she didn't answer. The call went to voicemail on the third ring. I told myself not to panic. My mother always misplaced her phone, or left it on silent, or buried it under piles of mail she never opened. But the silence felt intentional. It felt like she wasn't ready to talk, like she was waiting for something. Or someone. Later that night, Jordan came home smelling like the expensive cologne he only wore for client dinners. He told me he was tired. He told me there was drama at the office. He told me he just wanted to shower and sleep. I nodded and pretended not to notice that he didn't kiss me hello like he normally did. I didn't push him. I didn't ask questions. We were both avoiding something, though I didn't yet know we were avoiding the same thing. The next morning, I drove to my mother's house 2 hours earlier than planned. Atlanta traffic wasn't as bad before sunrise, and the quiet highway gave me too much room to think. I kept replaying the voicemail, the tremor in her voice, the way she said before it gets worse. Before what? By the time I pulled up to her street, the sun was barely peeking over the rooftops. Her house stood in its neat little row, white siding, blue shutters, overwatered hydrangeas drooping in the humid air. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I rang the bell. No answer. I rang again, longer. Still nothing. Just as I pulled my phone out to call her, I heard the faint shuffle of footsteps inside. The blinds in the living room twitched. A shadow moved behind them. My mother opened the door a crack, just enough for me to see her eyes. My breath caught. She looked exhausted. Not tired. Exhausted. Her eyes were red, her cheeks blotchy, her hair flattened on one side like she had slept sitting up. She stepped aside without saying anything. Inside, the house was unusually cold, as if she'd turned the AC to the lowest setting and forgotten about it. A blanket lay crumpled on the couch. A half-empty mug sat on the coffee table. Papers covered the dining table, scattered like someone had rifled through them in a panic. She told me she hadn't slept. I told her I could see that. She told me she didn't know how to begin. I told her to just say it. She sat down on the edge of the couch and buried her face in her hands. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. She said she had been hiding something from me for years. Something that wasn't just her secret. Something she should have told me before now. Something that involved Jordan. I froze. Jordan? What did my boyfriend have to do with my mother? She lifted her head and wiped her eyes. She told me she didn't know how to stop what was coming. She said she was afraid I would hate her. She said she was afraid of losing me. And then she said the sentence that sliced through my chest like a blade. She told me she had known Jordan long before I did. I felt my throat tighten. I told her that didn't make any sense. She said it would. She said she had hoped the past wouldn't come back. She said she had prayed that the truth would stay buried. She said she had believed she had done the right thing. I asked her what truth she was talking about. She didn't answer. Not immediately. The silence between us grew dense, almost suffocating. Then, very slowly, she reached to the coffee table, grabbed a stack of old envelopes tied with a brittle piece of string, and placed them in my lap. She told me the letters inside were written years before I was born. She told me the man who wrote them was someone she had once loved. Someone she should never have loved. And then she whispered the name. Jordan's father. My stomach dropped so violently I felt dizzy. Jordan's father? My mother? Jordan's father? My mind tried to assemble possible explanations, but every thought dissolved on contact with the next. I told her she needed to be clearer. She said she had been involved with him long ago. She said it wasn't supposed to mean anything. She said it wasn't supposed to last. She said she hadn't known he was married. She said when she found out, she ended it. She said she left town for a while. She said she thought she had put the whole thing behind her. I stared at her, unable to breathe. Jordan didn't know any of this. I didn't know any of this. His father had died when he was young, long before I met Jordan, so there was no one left alive to confirm anything except my mother. I asked her the question erupting in my chest. Why are you telling me this now? She whispered that she had seen something a month ago. Something she couldn't ignore. Something that terrified her. She told me she had seen Jordan's medical records. My heart stopped. She said she had been in an outpatient clinic for a routine check when she noticed a familiar last name on the clipboard of the woman beside her. She had glanced down, accidentally, she insisted, and saw Jordan's name on a referral form. And then she said the words that made my hands go numb. She told me the form listed a hereditary condition. A genetic marker. One she carried. One she had passed to me. One she had thought no one else in the world had. I blinked, stunned. She said Jordan had it too. A rare marker. A dominant one. Passed only from parent to child. The blood drained from my face. I stared at her. She stared at me. The implication landed between us like an explosion. If Jordan had the same genetic marker. If my mother had passed it to me. Then. My stomach twisted violently. I asked her if she was saying what I thought she was saying. Her eyes filled again. She nodded. Very slowly. Almost imperceptibly. But enough. Her voice cracked as she whispered. She believed Jordan might be my half-brother. The room spun. I could hear my heartbeat in my throat, in my fingertips, in the hollow place behind my ribs. I shook my head, stepping back. I told her no. I told her that wasn't possible. I told her she had to be wrong. She said she prayed she was wrong. She said she wanted to be wrong more than anything in her life. But the timing matched. The letters matched. The physical features matched. And now, the genetic marker matched. I stumbled backward until my back hit the wall. My mother reached for me. I flinched away. My breath came out in small, panicked bursts. I told her she should have told me years ago. She said she thought the truth would ruin my life. I told her it just had. My hands shook so violently that the letters in my lap spilled onto the floor. The paper was yellowed, creased, worn at the edges, the kind of wear that only comes from being read too many times. Some envelopes were still sealed. Others were torn open. I couldn't bring myself to touch them. I told her I needed air. I told her I needed to leave. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled and she sat back down with a soft, broken sound. She told me not to run. She told me not to disappear. She said she couldn't lose me too. I opened the front door anyway, the humid morning air hitting me like a wave. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Jordan. He told me he had something important to tell me. He said it couldn't wait. He said he'd be home early. My stomach clenched painfully. Did he know? Had he found out too? Was he trying to confess something? I didn't reply. I couldn't. I walked to my car, my legs trembling beneath me. The air felt thick, heavy, suffocating. I got inside, closed the door, and let out a sound I didn't recognize, half sob, half scream, all panic. As I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing, one last thought struck me with brutal force. If Jordan really was my half-brother, then every kiss, every touch, every whispered promise, every future plan, our entire relationship, was built on a lie that neither of us knew. Until now. And the worst part? If my mother was right, Jordan had already figured it out. The drive back to my apartment felt like moving through someone else's nightmare. The world outside the windshield was overexposed and unreal, all bright sky and glaring asphalt. My hands barely felt connected to my body as they rested on the steering wheel. Every time I blinked, I saw my mother's face again, the way it crumpled when she said the words half-brother, the way her hands shook when she pushed that stack of letters toward me. My phone buzzed again on the seat beside me. I didn't look. I knew without checking that it was Jordan. The thought of reading his name made bile rise in my throat. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of my building, the heat had turned the car into a slow-cooking oven. Sweat glued my blouse to my spine, but inside I felt icy, like someone had poured cold water down the length of my bones. I sat there for a full minute with the engine off, both hands still on the wheel, forehead resting against the heel of my palm, breathing in short, shallow bursts. Upstairs, the apartment smelled like laundry detergent and the faint trace of Jordan's cologne from the night before. His shoes were lined up by the door, his jacket draped over the back of the dining chair, his favorite mug upside down in the dish rack. All the normal evidence of a life we had built together. A life that might be something else entirely. My phone buzzed again. This time a call. The sound sliced through the quiet. I stared at the screen. Jordan's name glowed at me, bright white letters on black. I let it ring until it stopped, my chest tight. A minute later, he sent another message, short and insistent, saying he really needed to see me tonight, that it was serious. I walked into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked too bright, almost feverish. My lips were pale. My skin, normally a deep warm brown, seemed drained of color. I turned on the tap and splashed water on my face, hoping the shock would steady me. It didn't. At some point, I realized I was still holding my mother's voicemail in my head like a soundtrack, her voice looping, telling me she believed Jordan might be my half-brother, telling me about the genetic marker she carried, the one his medical file had revealed too. It was a stupid, cruel coincidence, my rational brain whispered. There had to be another explanation. It could be a lab error. It could be a misread file. It could be a different Jordan. It could be anything else. It had to be. But my rational brain felt very far away. I went to my laptop and opened a browser, fingers shaking as I typed. I searched for information on the condition my mother had mentioned, the weird, rare-sounding genetic marker she had named between broken sighs. The medical articles that came up were dense, clinical, full of diagrams and terminology I barely understood. One thing stood out, though, repeated in slightly different language across multiple sources. Dominant inheritance, parent to child, unlikely to spontaneously appear in an unrelated person. I closed the laptop so fast the sound made me jump. I knew what I needed to do, even if I didn't yet have the courage to admit it to myself. I needed facts. Not my mother's guilt-soaked guesses. Not my anxiety-fueled imagination. Cold, clinical, undeniable facts. I grabbed my phone and searched for genetic testing centers in the area. There were more than I expected. I scrolled with numb fingers until one caught my eye, a clinic that specialized in hereditary risk assessments, offering quiet, confidential appointments. I called before I could talk myself out of it. The receptionist spoke in a bright, practiced tone, asked about my availability, explained the steps. I heard myself tell her I wanted the soonest possible appointment. I heard her say they had a cancellation for Monday morning. I heard myself accept. She asked if any other family members would be joining. I told her no, not yet, not for this. When I hung up, the apartment felt even quieter. Monday felt both too far away and terrifyingly close. I spent the afternoon moving aimlessly from room to room, picking things up and putting them down, stopping in front of random objects like my brain was trying to tether itself to something ordinary. The framed photo on the bookshelf of Jordan and me at a friend's wedding. His watch on the nightstand. The grocery list on the refrigerator, half crossed out in his messy handwriting. Each item made my chest ache in a different way. Around 6, the sky outside shifted to that hazy pre-evening blue. Light filtered into the living room in a soft, forgiving way that made the dust in the air look like something romantic instead of neglected. I stood by the window, arms wrapped around myself, and realized with a jolt that Jordan could be on his way home any minute. I had no plan for what to say. At 6:22, I heard the sound of his key in the lock. The door opened. His footsteps were familiar, the soft thud of his boots, the quick exhale he always let out when he crossed the threshold. I didn't turn immediately. I watched his reflection in the glass instead, distorted and slightly ghost-like. He told me he had been trying to reach me all day. He sounded worried. He said he had even called my mother when I didn't answer, and she told him I had stopped by but left suddenly. He asked if I was all right. I turned then, slowly, my arms still wrapped tightly around myself. He looked more tense than I had expected, his jaw tight, his eyes shadowed. He had removed his tie on the way home, and it hung loosely around his neck. His shirt was wrinkled. He didn't look like a man who'd just had another long, ordinary day. He told me again that he needed to talk. That he had something to tell me. That it wasn't easy. Every cell in my body screamed at me to stop him. I was not ready. I did not want to hear whatever he was about to say, because my mind had already filled in the blank with the worst possible answer. Instead, I heard myself ask if something was wrong with his health. His eyes widened, just slightly. He asked how I knew. I told him I didn't, I had just guessed. He frowned, as if trying to decide how much to reveal, then said he had gone to the doctor for some tests, that they'd found something, that it wasn't immediately life-threatening but it was serious. He said the doctor mentioned it could be hereditary, that it might affect future children. My throat went dry. He said they had recommended genetic counseling. That he had begun some of the preliminary testing. That he had received part of the results earlier that week. He paused, as if bracing himself. He said they found a rare marker. Something unusual. Something you didn't just randomly have. He said the counselor told him it almost always came from a parent. My heart pounded so loud I thought he might hear it. He said he had started to ask questions. About his father. About his father's health. About his family's medical history. He said his mother had been cagey, evasive, telling him very little. He said the counselor had suggested that if he ever met anyone else with that same marker, there might be a direct connection. I felt the room tilt. He asked why I looked so pale. I told him I was just tired. His gaze hardened, like he didn't believe me. He said he had one more thing to tell me. He seemed to struggle with the words. Then he said he had found something in his childhood boxes at his mother's house. Old documents. A scrap of a lab report. A card from a clinic in another city. A crumpled, half-faded note with dates that didn't line up with the story he'd always been told about how his parents met. He said he was starting to think his father hadn't been faithful to his mother. He said he was starting to think there was more to his own story than he had ever known. I had to sit down. My knees wouldn't hold me. He followed me to the sofa and sat opposite, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. His eyes searched my face, desperate and raw. He told me he loved me. He said no matter what he found out about his family, that part wouldn't change. Then he admitted something that made my skin prickle. He said that for the first time, he was afraid of what bloodlines could mean. He said it like a confession. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to say my mother's name, his father's, the word half-brother, the phrase genetic marker. I wanted to spill it all out in one dizzy, breathless rush and let the truth crash between us. But I froze. I was suddenly terrified that anything I said in that moment would become the foundation for a reality neither of us could handle. I told myself I needed facts first. Independent ones. Not just his tests. Not just my mother's fear. Something we could both look at without wondering who had lied and when. So I lied by omission. I told him I was glad he told me about his health. I told him I was sorry he was going through this. I told him I would be there while he figured things out. I didn't mention that I had already booked my own appointment. I didn't mention that my mother had recognized that same rare marker. I didn't mention that there was a box of old letters tied with string sitting on her living room table. He seemed relieved by my calm, not realizing it was the kind of calm that comes only after the worst possibilities have already invaded every corner of your mind. That night, he fell asleep with his arm draped across my waist, his forehead pressed lightly against my shoulder. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, flinching every time he shifted. The warmth of his body, the familiar rhythm of his breathing, everything that had always comforted me suddenly felt heavy and wrong. If my mother was wrong, I told myself, we would fix this. We would laugh someday about how scared we had been. We would tell nearly disaster stories to friends over wine. It would become one of those tense chapters couples sometimes have, the kind that makes them stronger in the end. But if she was right, there was no version of this that ended with us still together. Monday came too quickly and not quickly enough. The genetic clinic was located in a glass building with too much light, the kind that made everything look washed out and clean and clinical. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Soft music played from a speaker somewhere, trying too hard to be soothing. A nurse led me to a small consultation office with pale walls and a print of abstract leaves above the desk. The genetic counselor was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calm voice that made me want to cry for no good reason. She asked me about my family medical history. I told her what I knew. I left a lot out. Then I told her about the specific marker my mother carried and how she believed I shared it, and that my partner had recently been told he had it too. The counselor didn't flinch. She asked clinical questions. She spoke about probability, inheritance patterns, testing accuracy. She didn't ask about my love life, what it meant that my partner and I might share a father. Maybe she'd heard it all before. Maybe she was pretending not to know what I wasn't saying. She drew blood. She said the results would take a bit of time. She asked if I wanted counseling resources in case of distressing findings. That phrase sat between us like a warning. I walked out of the building feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. I had done something. Taken a step. Moved from pure fear into a process. But the waiting, God, the waiting, felt like punishment. In the days that followed, my mother called repeatedly. I let most of the calls go to voicemail. In the ones I did listen to, she talked too fast, trying to fill silences with apologies and half-explanations. She said she had tried to reach Jordan's mother but had not yet found the courage. She said she was ready to do whatever was necessary to fix what she had broken. She said she would give me space if I needed it. She didn't understand that space was the only thing keeping me from exploding. Jordan, on the other hand, hovered closer than ever. He texted during the day, asking how I was, sending me memes, trying to keep things light. He cooked dinner twice, badly but earnestly. He touched me less physically, like he was aware of something fragile sitting between us, something that might shatter if we pushed too hard. One night, while I was washing dishes, he came up behind me and rested his chin on my shoulder. He told me he had made another appointment at the counseling center. He said he wanted me to come with him this time. He said he didn't want to go through this alone. The words lodged in my throat. I nodded because I couldn't speak. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang while I was at my desk at work. The clinic's number appeared on the screen. For a full 5 seconds, I just stared at it, my heart pounding so hard my vision blurred at the edges. When I answered, the counselor's voice was as calm as before. She asked if I had a moment to talk in private. I stepped into an empty conference room and closed the door. My hand shook so much I had to lean against the table. She told me they had my results. She said what I already knew deep down, what my mother had been so sure of: I carried the same rare genetic marker. The one that almost never appears without inheritance. The one my mother had. The one Jordan had. She began to explain what it meant for my own health, my risks, my options. Her voice became a distant hum. My brain latched onto one phrase and wouldn't let go: high probability of shared biological parent. I don't remember how I ended the call. I don't remember walking back to my desk. I do remember sitting in my chair and staring at my computer screen while a spreadsheet blurred into an incomprehensible mess of numbers and lines. Somewhere, deep under the shock, another thought began to form, slow and unwelcome. There was still one more person who had not yet spoken. One person who might know more than he had ever admitted. One person whose story had always had holes in it. Jordan's mother. I had met her many times, always as the slightly distant, overly polite woman who brought store-bought desserts to holidays and smiled without really engaging. She had never warmed to me fully, but she had never been overtly cruel either. She existed in a space just outside our relationship, like a satellite orbiting a planet she didn't entirely approve of. It occurred to me that she was also the only person still alive who had been there when Jordan was born. Who had known his father intimately. Who might remember details that mattered. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that if I wanted the complete truth, I would have to go to her. That evening, when Jordan came home, he sensed immediately that something had changed. He asked if I was okay. I told him we needed to talk, but not here. I told him we needed to see his mother. He looked confused, then wary. He asked why. I told him I thought she might have answers. He asked to what? I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud yet. I just repeated that we needed to talk to her, that it couldn't wait. He stared at me for a long time, and in that silence I saw something shift in his eyes. Confirmation. Fear. Understanding. Maybe he had already been thinking the same thing and wasn't ready to admit it. He said he would call her. She agreed to see us on Saturday. The rest of the week passed like a slow, grinding march toward an execution. Every day, I went through the motions at work, typed words I barely read, listened to conversations that sounded like they were happening underwater. At night, Jordan and I lay side by side in bed, each lost in our own private panic. Sometimes, I caught him watching me in the dark, his face half lit by the street lamp outside. His gaze was full of something beyond love, beyond fear. It looked like morning. On Saturday, we drove to his mother's house in near total silence. Her neighborhood was older, the kind with large trees shading narrow streets, where the houses sat close together and the yards were manicured with cautious pride. Her home was a one-story brick structure with white trim, the lawn perfectly edged, the porch decorated with seasonal plants. It looked like the kind of place where nothing unexpected ever happened. My stomach churned as we walked up the path. She opened the door before we rang the bell, as if she had been standing just behind it, listening for our footsteps. Her hair was pinned back, her expression composed, her eyes cool. She looked at her son first, then at me, and something hard flickered in her gaze. She told us to come in. The living room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and some kind of floral air freshener. Family photos lined the walls, Jordan at various ages, his mother and father at their wedding, a few group shots with relatives whose faces I couldn't place. Every picture now looked like potential evidence. We sat on the sofa. She sat in the armchair opposite, hands folded neatly in her lap. She asked what this was about. Jordan glanced at me, then told her we had both had some recent medical tests. He said a specific genetic marker had shown up in his results. He said it had shown up in mine too. He said the doctors had told him what that meant. His mother's face didn't change at first, but her fingers tightened on the armrests of the chair. He said we needed to know the truth about his father. About his past. About any affairs he might have had. About any previous relationships, any other children, anything that could explain what we'd discovered. His mother looked at him. Then at me. Then back at him. In the silence that followed, heavy and loaded, I realized something with a fresh bolt of dread. She already knew exactly what we were asking. And she had been hoping this day would never come. Jordan's mother didn't speak right away. She sat perfectly still, her fingers pressed into the chair arms so tightly that her knuckles whitened against her deep brown skin. The air in the living room had thickened, weighted with unsaid things. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and panicked, like it was trying to outrun the moment. Jordan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. He told her we were not here to accuse anyone. We were here because we needed answers. Because the silence was worse than anything she could possibly tell us. Her jaw tightened at that. I watched her swallow hard, once, like she was forcing down something sharp. Then she spoke. She said she had always known this day might come, but she prayed it wouldn't. She said she had hoped the past would stay buried. She said she had hoped we would never have reason to dig it up. She said she had tried to protect Jordan. She said she had tried to protect me. My breath caught at that last word. Me. I felt Jordan tense beside me. His mother looked directly at me, really looked at me, for the first time since we walked into her house. And in her gaze, I saw something I had never seen before. Not hostility. Not distance. Fear. Deep, heavy, bone-deep fear. She said she knew exactly what genetic marker we were talking about. She said she had recognized it the moment Jordan mentioned it. She said she had known someone else who had carried it. My mother. Her voice did not waver when she said it. Jordan inhaled sharply. I felt the blood drain from my face. She said she recognized the marker because she had once seen it listed on a clinic form, belonging to the woman her husband had an affair with. My legs nearly went numb. I tried to focus, but everything sounded muffled, distant, like I was underwater and the voices were drifting down to me through layers of heavy waves. She said back then, she hadn't known exactly who the woman was, only a name. A first name. A city. A few small details that didn't matter at the time because she had convinced herself the affair had ended and that her marriage was salvageable. She said she had decided to stay for Jordan's sake. She said she had forgiven him. But then she paused. Her face changed. Her eyes hardened, not with anger, but with something like sorrow and resignation. She said she had not forgiven everything. She said there were things she found out later that made forgiveness impossible. Jordan's posture stiffened. He asked what she meant. She told him she had kept something from him for nearly 30 years. Something she thought he was too young to understand then. Something she thought he didn't need to know. Something she thought would destroy him. She looked at her hands, those tight fingers unclenching slowly, trembling now. Then she lifted her head and said, Jordan's father didn't just have one affair. He had two. At the same time. With two sisters. My breath vanished. The room warped, melted, reformed at odd angles. She continued before either of us could speak. She said she learned the truth years after the fact. That he had been romantically involved with two women, my mother, and my mother's sister. At different times, but overlapping. She said he was reckless. Careless. Addicted to attention. She said he made promises he never kept. She said she only discovered the second affair when she found letters like the ones tied with string on my mother's table, only these were addressed to someone else. My aunt. I felt my stomach drop so sharply I thought I might faint. Jordan whispered something under his breath, too quiet to make out. His mother went on. She said she confronted her husband back then. She said he admitted pieces of the truth but denied others. She said he wouldn't say who had come first, who had come last, or whether he had fathered a child with either one. He claimed he didn't know. He didn't know. The room spun again. She told us she didn't believe him. Not entirely. But she didn't have proof. The affairs ended. He eventually died. And she told herself that whatever secrets he carried went with him to the grave. She told herself that was enough. Until now. Jordan asked, barely audibly, if he could be the result of either affair. His mother's eyes filled, but she didn't hesitate. Yes. The word shattered something deep inside me. She explained that during the time she would have conceived Jordan, her husband was unaccounted for many nights. Sometimes he was unreachable. Sometimes he claimed he was working late. Sometimes he gave excuses that made no sense. She said she had always suspected he might not be Jordan's biological father. She said she never told him because she didn't want him to feel unwanted. I felt Jordan's breath stutter beside me. I looked at him, his wide, stunned eyes, his trembling hands, and something inside me cracked open with grief. For him. For me. For everything we didn't know until this moment. I asked her if she thought Jordan might be my mother's child. She closed her eyes. Her voice nearly broke when she said, "It's possible. Possible." Just one word, but it hit like a hammer. Jordan stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair, pacing across the small living room with a frantic energy I had never seen in him. His breaths came quick and uneven, like he was trying not to drown. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. His mother said there was something else. Something she had never dared say aloud until now. The room dimmed around me. She said the second woman, my aunt, had also given birth around the same time as my mother. I felt sick. Jordan froze. My voice barely worked when I asked, did she mean, was there more than one child? And then she looked at me. Directly. Painfully. And said. She didn't know which sister had the child her husband fathered. My throat closed. She said the dates were too close. The secrecy too thick. The lies too tangled. She said she had tried to untangle it years ago, but everyone involved had reasons to hide the truth. And then, like a final blow, she added. And your aunt. She gave her baby up for adoption. The world went silent. Jordan stared at her, his face ashen. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. My aunt. My mother. 2 pregnancies. 1 affair. 2 affairs. 1 child given away. 1 child kept. 2 possible fathers. 3 possible siblings. My head spun so violently I had to grip the arm of the sofa. Jordan sat slowly, closing his eyes like he was trying not to break apart. I could feel the distance between us widening, stretching so far it felt impossible to cross anymore. His mother whispered that she was sorry. That she had been young and scared. That secrets like these had a way of swallowing people whole. Jordan didn't answer. I didn't either. Because in that moment, I realized something devastating. The question was no longer, are we siblings? The question had become, which one of us is related, and to whom? And the twist that hit hardest. There were 3 possibilities now. And only one of them would allow us to stay together. Just one. And the chances were getting smaller by the minute. Jordan stood in the center of his mother's living room like the floor had vanished beneath his feet. His hands were on his head, his shoulders shaking as he tried, and failed, to pull air into his lungs. The quiet panic rolling off him was so strong I could almost taste it. His mother looked at him with a kind of quiet desperation, her fingers trembling over the edges of her cardigan. She whispered his name, but he didn't look at her. He didn't look at me either. He looked like a man who had just lost the coordinates of his entire life. I tried to steady myself by gripping the sofa cushion, but the room still felt too bright, too quiet, too hollow. The words adoption, affair, sister, father looped in my head like a broken chorus. It didn't feel real. It felt like I had stepped into one of those daytime talk shows where the host says things like "We have the DNA results backstage," and the cameras zoom into people's shocked faces. Except this time, I was the shocked face. Jordan finally dropped into a chair, burying his face in his palms. His voice cracked when he said he didn't understand how this could happen. He said his whole life suddenly felt like a story someone else had written. He said he didn't know who he was anymore. He said he didn't know who we were anymore. Those words shattered something in me. His mother leaned forward, her voice quiet and trembling. She told him she had wanted to protect him from the truth, but she now realized her silence had only made everything worse. She apologized again, softly, brokenly, the kind of apology that comes far too late to matter. She looked at me then, her gaze softer than before. She said she understood if I hated her. That she had always feared this moment. That she knew secrets like this didn't just break people, they destroyed families. I swallowed hard, choking down the urge to scream. She wasn't wrong. Jordan finally stood, pacing again, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. I had never seen him cry. Not once. Not in 3 years of dating. Seeing him now, raw, terrified, cracked open, made my chest ache so much I wanted to collapse. He turned to me, voice shaking, and asked if I was okay. The question was absurd, but the fear in his eyes was real. I told him I wasn't okay. I told him I didn't know if I would ever be okay again. His face crumpled at that. He didn't touch me. He didn't try. And that silence between us said everything. We left his mother's house without another word. She watched us from the doorway, her hands clasped tightly as though praying we would come back whole. We didn't. The drive home felt endless. Jordan kept his eyes on the road, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch beneath his skin. At a red light, he whispered that he loved me. He said it like a man confessing to a crime. I couldn't answer. Love wasn't our problem anymore. Blood was. When we got home, the apartment felt unfamiliar. Like someone else lived there. Jordan sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I stood by the window, gripping my own arms until my nails dug into my skin. He finally spoke. He said we needed DNA testing, real, final answers. No more assumptions. No more theories. No more fears. Just facts. He said he didn't think he could breathe until we knew the truth. I nodded. Because he was right. We needed answers. He reached for my hand but stopped halfway, his fingers curling back slowly, painfully. He whispered that if the results were what we feared, if we were siblings, he would move out. Immediately. No discussion. No negotiation. I felt a sob rise like a storm in my chest, but I held it back. He said he didn't want to lose me, but he couldn't destroy me either. That night, he slept on the couch. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, we scheduled a full DNA sibling test. The lab said results would take a week. A week. 7 days. 168 hours. I counted every one of them. The days crawled. Jordan and I barely spoke. We moved around each other like ghosts, polite but haunted. He cooked dinner twice. I pretended to eat. He tried to hold me once, then pulled back like he'd touched fire. On the fifth day, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her eyes were swollen, her face tired. She asked if I hated her. I didn't answer. She said she wanted a chance to explain, to tell me the truth, all of it. I almost told her to leave. But something in her face, some mix of guilt, sadness, and deep maternal fear, made me let her in. She sat on my couch and told me everything. She told me Jordan's father had been charming, manipulative, good at making women feel special. She said he had pursued her, not the other way around. She said she had believed his lies. She had believed she was the only one. She said she never knew he had also been seeing her sister. She said when she found out, when my aunt confessed everything, she nearly left the city. She said she avoided her own sister for 2 years. She said they never repaired their relationship. She said she had spent decades wondering if her child, me, was his. I asked her why she didn't tell me. She cried harder. She said she wanted to protect me from shame. She said she didn't want me to feel like a mistake. She said she hoped the past would stay buried. She said she never imagined I'd fall in love with a man who might share the same blood. Her words twisted something sharp in my chest. I told her she should have told me everything. She nodded. She agreed. She said she had destroyed everything by staying silent. For the first time in days, I touched her hand. She folded over it and sobbed. When she left, the apartment felt heavier than before. On the 7th day, the last day of waiting, the email came through. Your DNA sibling test results are ready. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Jordan walked in from the kitchen, saw my face, and froze. He whispered, "Is that it?" I nodded. We sat together at the table. Not touching. Not breathing. My finger hovered over the link. Jordan whispered, "Whatever it says, we face it together." I clicked. The document loaded slowly, agonizingly slowly. Lines of text appeared. Then the key section. Probability of half-sibling relationship, 0%. I blinked. Jordan blinked. We leaned closer. Then the next line, bolded. Probability of full sibling relationship, 0%. My heart hammered. Jordan's breath hitched. And then the final line. No biological relationship detected. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Jordan's breath broke into a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He grabbed the table like he needed it to stay upright. Tears streamed down his face, relief, shock, release. I felt my whole body collapse into itself, like someone had untied a knot inside my spine. But then, just as quickly, a new fear hit me. If Jordan and I weren't siblings, then whose child was I? Whose child was he? The twist wasn't the DNA. The twist was the aftermath. Jordan took my face in his hands, kissing my forehead, my cheeks, my hands. He said he loved me over and over, like he had been holding it in for years. I held him too, crying into his shirt. But even in that moment of relief, I felt another truth rising inside me. A darker one. A heavier one. A quieter one. The test didn't fix everything. Because 2 families still had lies buried under decades of silence. 2 women, my mother and my aunt, had secrets engraved into their lives. 2 men, Jordan's father and mine, had left behind chaos that we were still unraveling. Relief didn't erase that. Jordan pulled back and whispered. "We're okay. We're really okay." I nodded. But inside, another thought pulsed softly, persistently. We were okay. But our families? They were about to burn. Because now that the truth about Jordan and me was settled, it was time to uncover who my real father actually was. And something deep in my bones told me I wasn't ready for that answer. At all.